The era we're living in is the information crisis, an epoch where we're overwhelmed with facts and fakes that both fill our world with new, sometimes beautiful ideas, but also fear and anger. That's according to a new book which notes that it is not the world's first information crisis, but rather our third. Don't Burn Anyone at the Stake today, and other lessons from history about living through an information crisis, is by Naomi Alderman, who joins us now to help us figure out potentially how to live through this current crisis. Naomi Alderman, thanks for your time and joining us on France 24. Firstly, can I ask you to talk us through your premise for this book? It's the world's third information crisis. So how does this one compare with, say, when writing was invented, or indeed the printing press?
Right, so we can look back through history and we can see that after the printing press was invented, indeed, there were wonderful, beautiful things that happened in the world, and we're all very pleased, I think, probably that the Enlightenment happened. But at the same time, it's pretty well established by historians that the invention of the printing press was what caused the Reformation, which caused in France and around Europe the burnings at the stake of hundreds of people. Catholics burned Protestants, Protestants burned Catholics, people who had previously felt that those around them were sort of roughly in agreement on most of the things that seemed important to them. Suddenly, with this huge tidal wave of information, which came in the form of books, in the form of pamphlets being the sort of original social media, suddenly people became very overwhelmed by information. It made them very anxious, made them very angry. People tended then to form think-alike groups where they just wanted to be around other people who had the same views as them. And we can see the traces of that same type of psychological process happening in the world around us right now. When I worked this out, so I just finished a master's in classics, where I was also looking at what happened after the invention of writing. So obviously, it's harder to know what happened before writing because they couldn't write it down. But certainly we know that, for example, the invention of particularly phonetic script, that is where every symbol makes a sound, causes societies mostly to become less respectful towards the elderly. Right, why does that happen? Because before you have writing, if you want to know what happened 60 years ago, you need to find a 70-year-old person. If you want to know where was the safe place to shelter the last time the river burst its banks, and maybe the river last burst its banks 40 years ago, you're going to have to find someone who's 50 or older to tell you what happened. Once you can write it down, that's much more secure. But it also leads to a devaluing of other human beings who previously were the repositories of knowledge for us. So these are the patterns that we can see. We can see that when these technologies of information dispersal increase quite suddenly within a generation, you often get very profound social unrest. And having spotted this pattern, I thought, oh, I have to tell everybody. I have to sort of grab the world by the lapels and go, it's all right. Everyone around you hasn't gone bananas. We have been through this before.
It is indeed very reassuring to think that humans have had similar reactions in the past, because indeed, especially after the printing press, what you're describing seems very much to mirror what we're living through today, and that dividing into groups. So one wonders then, how did things calm down again at that time? And, when might we start to do it, and how?
Right. So when we think about what had to happen after the invention of the printing press in order to get to the Enlightenment, that new flowering of scientific knowledge and discovery, when we really think about it, what we realize had to happen was that we needed, well, three things. We had to have laws that prevented people from telling absolute lies using printed media. So we had to have laws against libel, laws that said that if you were reading a particular thing, somebody had to have checked whether what was in it was true. We also had to have new technologies. So I'm talking about things like the invention of the index and the contents page and the textbook. Somebody had to invent it. Petrus Ramu, who lived in Paris, was the person who came up with the idea that you would have a book which had essentially a textbook, is a book that is written by someone who's read 500, 1,000 books in the subject and then can lead you through it. So we have to have ways of being guided through that information. And I think right now, as we can see from the constant scrolling, there isn't really a way to go, here is the critical information, and now you can turn it off. And we also needed new social norms. So we needed thoughts about, all right, what are the right ways to interact with text? How do I decide what to believe and what is untrue? This also works with the technologies, for example, of the invention of the system of scientific journals and peer review, where you go, all right, there are systems which mean that I know I can absolutely trust that if I'm reading this, it's definitely correct. And if I'm reading this thing that I picked up on a park bench, that might just be nonsense. And for now, on the internet, a lot of those systems don't really exist yet. They exist in print, which I think is helpful for us. I think people understand that if you're watching something on France 24, that has more likelihood of being correct than a random video on TikTok, which might have been created by Sora or whatever. So I find it hopeful that those systems haven't completely broken down. And if we can find ways to make sure that those systems then exist within the wider internet, I think we will be in a better place. But we are going to have to call for that using laws and also enforce the laws that we already have much more strictly on the internet in order to get ourselves through this.
Indeed, there definitely seems to be a need for that will to put laws in place at the same speed with which technology is developing. But speed is something that I feel could come against us. So I feel a lot of people want to go so fast when it comes to information and even achieving skills or commenting, which a lot of your book talks about, on what they see online. I mean, is that where humans maybe need to take a breath in order to live better through this crisis?
I mean, I certainly don't think that the only answer is, as people say, personal responsibility, because I do think that we need better laws, better governments. I mean, I think the EU is in an amazing place to push back against the technology companies that are absolutely trying to addict people to false, bad information. But having said that, I think the idea of being able to say, okay, this information crisis is going to be going on for the rest of our lives, the rest of my life, the rest of your life, the rest of the viewers' lives. And therefore, one of the questions one can ask oneself is, how do I want to have lived during this period of history? Given, probably our descendants are going to be able to have quite a lot of information about what we did. And those thoughts, which I put into the book about saying to ourselves, all right, if I find something on the internet that seems incredibly calculated to push my own buttons, to make me feel angry in exactly the way that it's going to really most enrage me, to upset me, or to make me feel very, very frightened, or even to make me delighted in the way that I love being delighted. If I come across something like that, maybe that is the moment to just take a pause. Instead of retweeting it or reposting it, to say, this thing that is specially targeted towards me, that has made me feel these strong emotions, I need to check whether that is true or not. This would be a very helpful social norm and a very helpful thing to teach children. I mean, this is another very important question, because right now there are very few safeguards on the big fire hose of the internet. It is often quite hard to know how to give children safe access to the internet in a way that's going to enable them to learn how to behave. And I do think that it's probably quite a helpful plan for parents to show their children what they're doing when they're scrolling and making decisions about, this is how I decide whether this is true or not. This is how I decide how to respond. Look, this is something that has made me angry, and instead I'm putting it down. These are different questions to, we don't have phones at mealtimes, which is also a great strategy, but also to be modeling how to behave online to children, rather than just going, keep them away from social media until they are 16 or 18, and then just let them loose. But instead making that part of parenting conversations.
interesting and not burying our head in the sands when it comes to all this new technology, which I think a lot of us potentially might like. But one of the suggestions you give also is to ignore the opinions of others. I'm hearing that when you speak about it online, I can hear the logic. But how much do you think this is petering down to people's communications in everyday life? I mean, do we nearly risk, I feel like people have become so angry now, quick to anger if you like, that do we run the risk of being able to hold healthy debate in society?
I definitely think that the skill of sitting round a table and having a conversation is a vital skill for the next 50 years. Just to be able to go, we have different views, we're not going to agree, but I can respect the reasons that you hold those views. So to me, there is a really important distinction between disagreeing and treating people poorly. You do not have to treat somebody poorly just because you disagree with them. And if you think about what has happened since the print revolution, since the Reformation, indeed, although a lot of people got burned at the stake, there are still Protestants and there are still Catholics. And therefore, we do have to just sort of work out how to be able to talk to one another in some healthy ways. So when I say in the book, I'm increasingly, I am not very interested in opinions and much more interested in emotions, which is to say, if somebody feels strongly about a particular opinion that they hold, I'm very interested to know what other life circumstances that have led them to that. I'm very interested to know why this strikes such a chord with them, what it's bringing up for them. These are all stories about who that person is that can enable me to understand the world better. If somebody is not an expert in a particular subject, I don't think I probably need to take their opinion very seriously. But and the same applies to me, by the way.
Okay.
The reason that I can talk about this is because I've done my degrees in it, but a lot of what I think is about feelings.
Naomi Alderman, unfortunately we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us here on France 24. Very much appreciated.